My wife fell 3 with a disease that is transmitted only sexually, and she accused me of cheating. I hired a detective and found out that she is cheating on me with her trainer. You never really expect it to happen to you, right? All those stories about infidelity, broken families, and lives torn apart. It's always something that seems to happen to someone else, not to you, not to someone like David. He had worked relentlessly for years at his corporate job, giving his all to provide a comfortable life for his family. He had climbed the ranks, sacrificed weekends and late nights, all in the name of stability and security for the people he loved. His wife, Linda, was a fitness fanatic. She was the kind of woman who looked like she could have walked right off the cover of a fitness magazine, with her toned body and boundless energy. Together, they had built a life, raised 2 kids, Daniel and Lily. And though things weren't perfect, they were good enough. At least, that's what he thought. Linda had always been one of those women who lived in her gym clothes. Tight leggings and sports bras were her uniform. She spent more time at the gym than at home, it seemed, and constantly encouraged David to do the same. David, however, was the typical office worker. He spent hours hunched over a desk, answering emails, attending meetings, and trying to make his way through the corporate jungle. He wasn't unfit, but he wasn't exactly in shape either. Linda's constant reminders about healthy living and the importance of staying active were a running theme in their relationship, and David always promised he'd get back into working out someday. Things started to shift when Linda began complaining more often about feeling exhausted. She'd come home after hours at the gym, collapse on the couch, and gripe about how drained she felt. At first, David thought nothing of it. She was always pushing herself to the limit with her clients, always juggling multiple classes, so feeling tired was to be expected. But soon, the complaints escalated. Linda wasn't just tired anymore. She said she felt sick. Naturally, she went to the doctor, and David didn't think much of it, until he got a call that made his stomach drop. "I need to talk to you," Linda said when she called him, her voice sounding uneasy. "When I get home." That was all she said. No explanations, no reassurances, just a vague, ominous statement that left David anxious and spiraling. He spent the rest of the day replaying every possible scenario in his mind, trying to figure out what could be wrong. When Linda finally walked through the door, the first words out of her mouth knocked the wind out of him. "I have an STD," she blurted, her voice flat, as if she had just told him something mundane, like they were out of milk. David's mind blanked. The words didn't register at first. It didn't compute. "What?" he muttered, his brain struggling to catch up. "A sexually transmitted disease, David," Linda clarified. "The doctor ran some tests, and that's what they found." David stood frozen, the world tilting beneath him. Linda had an STD. His wife, the woman he had been with for over a decade, the mother of his children, had contracted a sexually transmitted disease. His stomach churned, his heart raced, and then came the final blow. "You should get tested too," she added, "just to be sure." In a daze, David complied. He went to the doctor, got tested, and the results came back as he had feared, positive. He had it too. That one moment, that one result, shattered his life. Trust, the foundation of their relationship, crumbled beneath them. The life they had built, the family they had raised, suddenly felt like a lie. But Linda, she didn't even seem fazed. In fact, she turned on him immediately. "This is your fault," she yelled, her voice sharp with accusation. "Who the hell have you been messing around with?" David could barely believe his ears. His wife, the woman he had never once betrayed, was accusing him of cheating? The shock gave way to anger, boiling up in his chest as he struggled to keep his voice steady. "Linda, are you serious right now?" he asked, trying to make sense of her sudden outburst. "I've never been with anyone else but you." But Linda wasn't having it. She was relentless, firing off accusation after accusation, listing every minor grievance she could remember from the past 6 months. He didn't pay enough attention to her. He worked too much. He wasn't supportive enough of her career. It was like everything she had bottled up over the years came spilling out, and David could hardly keep up. It was during her tirade that the pieces started to fall into place. Linda's sudden emotional distance, her late nights at the gym, the new clothes she'd started wearing, clothes he had never seen her wear at home. Suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't about him. This was about her. Linda was hiding something. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, but he kept his cool. He didn't shout. He didn't throw accusations back at her. He simply let her rant, all the while connecting the dots in his mind. He wasn't stupid. He knew the signs of infidelity. He had just been too distracted by work and the kids to see what was happening right in front of him. And then there was Rachel, Linda's best friend. Rachel had always been around, part of their family's inner circle. But lately, David noticed something odd. Whenever Rachel came over, she and Linda would slip away, whispering in hushed tones, leaving him to sit with the kids in the living room. At first, he didn't think much of it, but as time went on, it started to bother him. What were they talking about that was so secretive? Why did they feel the need to hide it from him? It wasn't just Linda's paranoia about him cheating that felt off. It was everything. Her distance, her secretive phone calls, the late nights, the way she'd started coming home later and later, always with some excuse about a client needing extra attention or the gym being particularly busy that night. David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Linda was hiding something. And it wasn't just her work at the gym. He decided he needed answers, but confronting Linda directly would get him nowhere. She was already on the defensive, and any accusations would only make her dig in deeper. No, David needed proof. He needed to know for sure what was going on. And that's when he made the call. Hiring a private investigator wasn't a decision David took lightly, but he knew it was the only way to get to the truth. His friend Steve had mentioned someone, a guy named Alex, who specialized in uncovering infidelity. David was hesitant at first, but the gnawing suspicion in his gut wouldn't let him rest. He needed to know. So, he called Alex, explained the situation, and hired him to follow Linda. Alex didn't waste any time. Within 2 weeks, David had his answer. Alex handed him a thick manila envelope filled with photos and videos, proof of everything David had feared. Linda had been meeting up with her personal trainer, Ryan. He had heard her mention Ryan a few times, talking about how he was helping her perfect her routine or how he was great at keeping her motivated. But David had never thought much of it. Now, staring at the photos in his hands, it was clear that Ryan was more than just a trainer. There were photos of them in parking lots, standing too close, exchanging glances that lingered just a bit too long. And then there were the videos, grainy footage of Linda and Ryan leaving the gym together, their bodies pressed too close for comfort, their hands brushing in ways that clients and trainers didn't. The reality of what had been happening hit David like a tidal wave. His wife was cheating on him. For a moment, David felt the overwhelming urge to confront Linda, to scream at her, to throw the evidence in her face and demand an explanation. But then, a calmer, colder part of him took over. Confronting her now would only give her the chance to lie, to twist the story, to make herself the victim. No, David needed a plan. He needed to be methodical. Over the next few days, David played the role of the clueless husband. He didn't confront Linda, didn't let on that he knew anything. Instead, he watched her closely, piecing together the details of her lies. Every time she left for the gym, every time she picked up her phone and quickly flipped the screen down when he walked by, it added fuel to the fire. He knew what she was doing, and he knew who she was doing it with. But Linda had no idea that her secret was out. One Saturday morning, David casually mentioned that he was thinking about joining the gym again. He wanted to get back into shape, maybe start working out with her. Linda's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened just slightly before she forced a smile. "Oh, that's great," she said, her voice a little too cheerful. But, maybe not today. I've got a packed schedule with clients." David smiled back, pretending to accept her excuse, but inside, he knew the truth. She didn't want him there because Ryan was there. She didn't want him to see what was really going on. The longer David played along, the more obvious Linda's lies became. She'd come home late, sweating, but not from any workout he knew of. She started buying new lingerie, expensive, fancy pieces she never wore for him. It wasn't hard to figure out who they were for. Then, there was Rachel. Linda had always used Rachel as an excuse when she needed to cover her tracks. If she wasn't with Ryan at the gym, she was with Rachel, grabbing coffee or having a girls' night. But the more David thought about it, the more it became clear that Rachel was just another part of the cover-up. David's suspicions were confirmed when Alex dug up even more dirt, this time on Ryan. It turned out that Ryan had a bit of a reputation at the gym. He was known for getting too close to his female clients, for blurring the lines between professional and personal. Linda wasn't the first woman he had seduced, and she probably wouldn't be the last. Armed with this information, David knew he had the upper hand. But he didn't confront Linda right away. No, he had something else in mind. He wanted to make her squirm, to let her feel the weight of her lies closing in around her. He started small, making offhand comments about the gym or Ryan, watching Linda's face for any sign of panic. She was good at hiding it, but every now and then, David could see the cracks in her composure. She was nervous. She knew something was off, but she didn't know what. Then came the day David had been waiting for. He walked into the living room where Linda was sitting, her phone in her hand, probably texting Ryan. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face calm. "Megan," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Linda looked up, her face immediately guarded. She sensed something was wrong, but had no idea just how bad it was about to get. David tossed the envelope onto the coffee table in front of her. "Open it," he said, crossing his arms as he leaned back against the couch. Linda hesitated, her hands shaking as she reached for the envelope. She pulled out the photos, flipping through them slowly, her face going pale. "I know everything," David said, his voice cold. "The affair with Ryan, the lies, all of it." Linda's face crumpled as the reality of her betrayal sank in. David didn't give her the chance to make excuses. Jenny's words echoed in the room like a death knell. Linda stared at her best friend, her mouth slightly agape, her face a pale mask of disbelief and growing horror. For a moment, it was as if everything stopped. The ticking of the clock, the distant hum of traffic outside, even the frantic pace of Linda's thoughts. She couldn't comprehend what had just been said. What did you just say?" Linda stammered, her voice barely a whisper, as if asking for clarification might somehow change the devastating reality that had just been laid before her. Jenny's eyes flicked to David, filled with shame and regret, before dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry," she muttered again, her voice cracking. "I never meant for this to happen." Linda's face twisted in confusion, betrayal, and growing fury. "You slept with my husband?" she finally hissed, the words laced with venom. Jenny flinched, but David stood stoic, his face impassive. He could see the storm brewing inside Linda. Her body was shaking, her breath quickening, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and rage. This was the moment David had been waiting for, the moment when the carefully constructed facade of Linda's life would come crashing down. Her affair, her deceit, her lies. It all paled in comparison to what she was now realizing. "You what?" Linda's voice had dropped to a low, dangerous whisper, her trembling fingers clenching into fists at her sides. Her eyes darted from David to Jenny, desperately searching for some sign that this wasn't real, that this nightmare could somehow be undone. But it couldn't. Jenny shifted uncomfortably under Linda's gaze. It was a mistake, Linda. A one-time thing. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." "You never wanted to hurt me?" Linda exploded, her voice rising into a shriek as she stood, her fists now shaking with anger. "You slept with my husband. You—" Her voice broke, and for a moment, she seemed on the verge of crumbling completely. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they weren't born of guilt or regret. They were born of rage. Jenny took a step back, her own tears starting to form as she looked pleadingly at Linda. "It wasn't like that." "Then what the hell was it like?" Linda snapped, advancing toward Jenny with a ferocity that was terrifying to witness. How could you? How could both of you?" Her gaze shot to David, and the sheer fury in her eyes made him pause. You did this just to hurt me, didn't you?" she spat, her voice dripping with malice. "You couldn't stand the thought of me being with someone else, so you decided to sleep with my best friend to get back at me." David remained calm, his arms crossed over his chest as he watched her rage. "You don't get to play the victim here, Linda," he said, his voice cold, calculated. "You had an affair. You betrayed me first. Linda's face twisted in disgust, as if she couldn't even recognize the man standing before her. "I made a mistake," she hissed through clenched teeth. "But you did this out of spite. You wanted to destroy me." David's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe, but I'm not the one who tore our family apart, Linda. That was all you." The accusation hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like Linda might explode, might hurl something at him, might finally release the rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. But instead, she crumbled. The anger in her eyes was replaced with something else, something more devastating: defeat. Her body sagged, and she sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. David had expected this moment to bring him some kind of satisfaction, some kind of closure. But as he watched his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, break down in front of him, all he felt was a strange hollowness. There was no victory here, only the slow, painful unraveling of a life that had once seemed so stable. "I'm filing for divorce," David repeated, his voice firm, though he didn't raise it. "And I'm going to fight for full custody of Daniel and Lily." At the mention of the kids, Linda's head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. "No," she choked out, shaking her head. "David, please, don't take them from me. We can work something out." "There's nothing left to work out," David interrupted, his tone icy. "You've been lying to me for months. You think I'm just going to forget about that? About Ryan? About everything?" Linda's breath hitched, and she looked like she was on the verge of begging. But David was already done. He had said what he needed to say. The final blow had been dealt. Behind him, Jenny stood frozen, still reeling from the chaos she had helped unleash. She took a small step back, her eyes darting nervously between David and Linda, as if she were trying to figure out the best way to escape the situation she had found herself in. "I'll give you some time to process this," David said quietly, turning toward the door. "But we're done, Linda. There's no fixing this." He didn't look back as he left the room, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, Linda's sobs filled the empty silence of the house. He had won. He had destroyed her life as thoroughly as she had destroyed his. But instead of feeling triumphant, all David felt was empty. The day the divorce was finalized, David felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was a hollow kind of relief, the kind that comes not from winning, but from simply being done with a long, drawn-out battle. The papers had been signed, the agreements finalized, and Linda was no longer his problem. The custody battle had been harder than he anticipated. Linda had fought tooth and nail to keep the kids with her, but David had been relentless. In the end, the courts had sided with him, granting him primary custody. Daniel and Lily would live with him, and Linda would have visitation rights. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the alternative. After everything that had happened, after all the lies and the betrayals, David couldn't bear the thought of his children growing up in the chaos that Linda had created. He wanted to give them a stable home, a place where they could feel safe and loved. And that's exactly what he intended to do. For the first time in years, David felt free. He moved out of the house he and Linda had shared and rented a small, two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him and the kids. The apartment was cozy, with a small kitchen and a living room that opened up to a balcony overlooking the city. It wasn't the suburban dream home he had once imagined for his family, but it was peaceful, quiet. Linda, on the other hand, was spiraling. Word had gotten out about her affair with Ryan, and her social circle had all but abandoned her. The gym, once her sanctuary, had become a place of whispers and sideways glances. Ryan had left town, unable to face the fallout of what had happened, and Linda had been left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. David didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But he couldn't deny that watching her fall from grace had been a strange experience. The woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, was now a shell of her former self. But David had more important things to focus on. He had his kids to take care of, his new life to build. He threw himself into his work, using the time he would have spent fighting with Linda to grow his career. He had always wanted to start his own business, but Linda had never been supportive. She had always worried about the risks, about the uncertainty of it all. But now, with nothing holding him back, David decided to take the leap. He started small, working out of his apartment and taking on freelance clients whenever he could. It was hard at first. The hours were long, the pay wasn't great, and there were days when he wondered if he had made a mistake. But slowly, things began to pick up. Word spread about David's work, and before long, he had more clients than he could handle. He rented a small office downtown and hired a couple of employees to help him manage the workload. The business grew, and with it, David's confidence. He was finally doing something he loved, something that was his, and it felt incredible. He was building something real, something that no one could take away from him. As the months passed, David began to settle into his new life. The chaos and pain of the divorce started to fade into the background, replaced by a sense of peace and stability that he hadn't felt in years. His relationship with Daniel and Lily grew stronger, and their home became a place of laughter and joy once again. The kids were adjusting well to the new normal. Daniel, now 12, was thriving in school, making new friends and excelling in his classes. He had taken up basketball, a sport that David had played in high school, and David loved spending weekends shooting hoops with him at the local park. Lily, now 9, was blossoming into a bright, creative young girl. She loved to draw, and her bedroom walls were covered with her colorful artwork. She had always been a little more sensitive than her brother, but she was handling the divorce surprisingly well. She still asked about her mom sometimes, but David was careful to keep his answers neutral, not wanting to poison her relationship with Linda. He knew that Linda still loved the kids, in her own way, but she had made too many mistakes, and David wasn't willing to let her drag them down with her. Life, for the first time in a long time, was good. And then, one afternoon, something happened that David hadn't expected. It was a Saturday, and David had taken the kids out for ice cream. They were sitting at a small table outside the shop, Daniel licking at a towering cone of mint chocolate chip while Lily giggled as her scoop of strawberry dripped down her hand. David smiled, watching them, his heart full. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her. Linda. She was walking down the sidewalk, her head bowed, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her coat. She looked different, thinner, more worn, as if the past few months had taken a toll on her. David tensed, his grip tightening on his cup of coffee as he watched her approach. He hadn't seen her in weeks, not since their last court hearing, and he wasn't sure how to feel about running into her now. She didn't see him at first. She was lost in her own world, her eyes trained on the ground as she walked. But as she drew closer, her gaze flicked up and she froze. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. David wasn't sure what to expect, maybe anger, maybe sadness. But what he saw in Linda's eyes wasn't either of those things. It was regret. She stood there for a moment, just staring at him, and then her gaze shifted to the kids. Her face softened, and for a split second, David saw a glimmer of the woman he had once known. But then it was gone, replaced by the tired, broken shell she had become. Without a word, Linda turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his heart pounding in his chest. "Dad?" Lily's voice broke through his thoughts, and he looked down to see her staring up at him, concern in her big brown eyes. "Are you okay?" David forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm okay." And for the first time in a long time, he realized that he really was. After that brief encounter with Linda, David found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. Not in a nostalgic way, but rather in a contemplative one. He wondered how she was handling her life post-divorce. How was she getting by without the kids, without the social circle she had so carefully cultivated, and without Ryan, who had vanished from her life as quickly as he had entered it? David didn't feel sympathy for her, not really, but there was something about seeing someone who had once been so central to his life now reduced to a shadow of herself that gnawed at him. But that gnawing didn't last long. Life for David was moving in the opposite direction, upward, onward, and forward. His business had taken off in ways he had never anticipated. What had started as a small venture with a couple of freelance clients had grown into a full-fledged consulting firm. David was busier than ever, but this time, it wasn't draining. It wasn't the kind of busyness that left him feeling hollow like the corporate grind had. This was fulfilling, exciting even. He had a sense of purpose now, something that belonged solely to him, something he could pour his energy into without second-guessing himself. His team grew as well. He had hired several employees, old colleagues who respected him and wanted to work for someone they trusted. The work was hard, the hours were long, but it was rewarding. David's firm had developed a reputation for quality, for delivering on its promises, and soon enough, they had more contracts than they could handle. One of the proudest moments came when they landed a contract with a major healthcare company that needed a complete overhaul of their IT infrastructure. It was the kind of project David had once dreamed about when he was still stuck in his corporate job, and now, here it was, his to lead. The contract was worth more than anything he'd ever taken on before, but instead of being overwhelmed, David felt ready. This was what all his years of hard work had been building toward. As his professional life flourished, so too did his personal life. Daniel and Lily were thriving in the new, peaceful environment David had created for them. They had adjusted to the new normal remarkably well. The tension that had once filled their home, the constant undercurrent of conflict between David and Linda, was gone. In its place was laughter, warmth, and a sense of security that David hadn't realized they had been missing until now. Daniel, now a teenager, had taken to basketball with a passion that surprised even David. He had joined the school team and was quickly becoming one of the best players, and David never missed a game. Watching his son develop his skills, grow in confidence, and excel in something he loved filled David with a pride he hadn't felt in years. They spent countless weekends together, shooting hoops at the local park, talking about everything from school to sports to life. Lily, ever the creative soul, had become even more expressive with her artwork. She had transformed her room into a vibrant gallery of drawings and paintings, each one more colorful than the last. David encouraged her every step of the way, always making time to sit with her and admire her latest creation. She had a lightness about her now, a joy that radiated from her in ways it never had before. It was as if the absence of Linda's constant drama had allowed Lily to fully blossom into the bright, happy child she was always meant to be. Every day, David was reminded of just how far they had all come. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was a home. And it wasn't just the kids who had found their footing. David had, too. He had begun dating again, tentatively at first. For a long time, the idea of being with someone new had seemed impossible, like an emotional hurdle he wasn't ready to face. But as time passed, David found himself drawn to the idea of starting fresh. He wasn't the same person he had been during his marriage to Linda. He was stronger now, more self-assured, and less willing to compromise who he was for the sake of anyone else. It wasn't long before he met someone, Emma. She was different from Linda in almost every way. Where Linda had been demanding and high maintenance, Emma was calm, easygoing, and refreshingly honest. She worked as a teacher, loved hiking, and had a genuine warmth about her that made David feel at ease from the moment they met. Their relationship wasn't rushed. It unfolded naturally, with no pressure or drama. They took things slow, getting to know each other, enjoying each other's company without any of the games that had characterized David's marriage to Linda. The kids adored Emma, and she was wonderful with them. She never tried to replace their mother, never overstepped her boundaries. Instead, she became a positive, supportive presence in their lives, someone they trusted and cared for. Watching Emma interact with Daniel and Lily, seeing how happy they were around her, made David realize just how much they had all needed someone like her. As the months turned into years, David and Emma grew closer. She understood his past, respected the challenges he had faced, and never made him feel like he had to pretend to be someone he wasn't. They laughed together, shared their dreams, and built a relationship founded on trust and mutual respect, something David hadn't realized was possible until he experienced it. Then, one day, when everything felt just right, David asked Emma to marry him. It wasn't an elaborate proposal, not the kind you see in movies or hear about in grand stories. It was simple, quiet, just the two of them sitting on the porch of his house, watching the sunset. He didn't need a grand gesture to know that this was where he was meant to be, that Emma was the person he was meant to spend the rest of his life with. And she said yes. Their wedding was small, intimate, surrounded by only close friends and family. Daniel was David's best man, and Lily was the flower girl. Emma's parents were there, as well as a few of David's colleagues and longtime friends. There were no grand speeches, no over-the-top decorations, just a simple ceremony filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a new beginning. As David stood at the altar, looking into Emma's eyes, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was what he had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not some unattainable ideal, but real happiness. He had been through the fire, had faced the worst that life could throw at him, and had come out the other side stronger for it. And now, he was free. Linda, of course, wasn't there. By this point, she had faded into the background of David's life. They still communicated occasionally, mostly about the kids, but their interactions were brief and distant. Linda had tried to rebuild her life after the divorce, but from what David heard, she had struggled. Ryan had moved on to another town, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone, and her reputation at the gym had never fully recovered. David didn't take pleasure in her downfall. He had moved past that, past the need for revenge or validation. He had let go of the bitterness, the anger. There was no room for it in his new life, and truthfully, he had no desire to hold on to it anymore. He had found peace, and that was more than enough. On the day of the wedding, as David stood with Emma, their hands clasped together, he glanced over at Daniel and Lily, sitting in the front row, beaming at him. They had been through so much together, had weathered the storm of a broken home, and now here they were, stronger, happier, and more united than ever. David smiled, knowing that they had all come out the other side of the darkness. His journey had been long, painful, and filled with heartbreak, but it had led him to this moment. And as he exchanged vows with Emma, promising to love and cherish her for the rest of his life, he knew that everything had been worth it. The reception was small but joyful. Laughter echoed through the room as friends and family toasted to David and Emma's future together. Daniel made a short, heartfelt speech, talking about how happy he was to see his dad so full of life again. Lily danced with Emma, her face lit up with pure joy, twirling around the dance floor as the music played softly in the background. For the first time in years, David felt like everything had fallen into place. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, David sat on the porch with Emma, looking out at the stars. His hand was wrapped around hers, their wedding rings glinting in the soft moonlight. "You happy?" Emma asked, her voice soft, her head resting on his shoulder. David looked down at her, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah," he said, "I really am." And for the first time in a long time, he knew it was true. His past was behind him, his future was bright, and he was ready to face whatever came next. With Emma by his side, Daniel and Lily in his heart, and the knowledge that he had fought for the life he now had, David was free. Free from the mistakes of his past, free from the pain that had once consumed him, and free to finally live the life he had always deserved. And that was all he ever wanted.